Poppy Playtime is a franchise that I've always had a bit of a rocky relationship with. On one hand, I always saw it as a game with a damn near infinite amount of potential, with all the talent behind it as well as the clear, objective quality of the chapters that have been released. On the other hand though, I always felt like despite that potential, it didn't really stand out to me all that much outside of a mild passing interest. That being said though, recently Chapter 3 of the game came out, and with each piece of promotional material I saw for it, I found myself growing more and more interested in what it could offer. A darker approach to Poppy's typical formula, with a villain and setting that promised a greater focus on the horror that previous chapters often lacked. And upon my first playthrough, I must say that this chapter absolutely managed to win me over as a Poppy Playtime fan. Everything I could have wanted from this game, every bit of potential I thought previous chapters didn't live up to, has been fully realized with Chapter 3. This is a legitimately fantastic experience, and to show you what I mean, I'd like to go in depth on one very specific section of it. A section which I feel perfectly showcases this chapter at its best to give you an idea of just how much of an improvement it is. So, without further ado, let's delve into it. The section I want to talk about today is found in the third major location that we encounter throughout the chapter, the Playhouse. But before we can properly explore what made this moment stand out so much, some context is needed both for those who need a refresher and those who are learning about this for the first time. Poppy Chapter 3 begins after the train crash seen at the end of Chapter 2, with us being kidnapped and taken to a new location called Playcare by the chapter's main villain, a cultist by the name of Catnap. This entire chapter is all about escaping Playcare and delving deeper into the factory's depths, going to several different distinct locations so we can restore power to the facility. And it's when we get this objective early on that the first mention of the Playhouse occurs, with our guide for the chapter, Ollie, having this to say regarding the location.
But where to go next? Everywhere is pretty dangerous around here. That playhouse especially. Yuck! So, your best bet is probably the school.
Right off the bat, the Playhouse is singled out as the worst place we can possibly go, and that immediately caught my attention because the other alternative areas we both went through and will go through aren't exactly a cakewalk. By the time we're told this, we've already gone through a PT-esque horror sequence in Home Sweet Home and are making our way towards the school where we're chased by an evil teacher who wants to cannibalize us. If this specific area is being called out by the game as being the worst place to go despite everything else we've encountered, then it must house something that far exceeds them. Naturally, as a result of this warning, we avoid the Playhouse to the best of our abilities, taking whatever alternative routes possible. However, fate has a different plan for us, because after escaping Miss Delight in the school and traveling through an underground cave system, we eventually arrive at the only way out that is available to us. This was the second moment that really had me fascinated by what lies inside the Playhouse. Throughout the entire chapter leading to this moment, every new area we went to was of our own volition. We chose to step foot in Home Sweet Home. We chose to enter the school, but now as we stand before the entrance to the Playhouse, we realize it's the only route available to us. We can't avoid it anymore. Stepping inside, at first, it feels kind of underwhelming. We're swarmed by a bunch of tiny little critters that we fend off with a flare gun, and we do a couple puzzles, but outside of that, not much seems to happen here. At first, I thought maybe I oversold this place in my mind, setting up an expectation through what the game told me that it couldn't deliver on. However, after solving another puzzle and working our way through this strange room ahead of it, we find ourselves in the cell block. From the moment we arrive in this place, there is an immediate change in the tone. The colorful, cushiony look of the playhouse is now traded for that of the grungy, disgusting look of the cell block. The walls are stained with dry viscera, and the only light source present here are candles, as if this is a place of worship. Prison cells line the walls, with one even being open, which allows us to discover that this place is where Catnap goes to rest, right next to all of his prisoners. Examining more of the cells, we can see that the majority of them haven't been used in a long time, being filled with more dried blood and debris. No prisoners to be found, all except for one.
You're Poppy's angel. Come to save us. Nothing left to save. Not here. Lord Catnap's home, angel. Their home.
This is Dog Day, the only prisoner left and the last survivor of the smiling critters, now crucified to the wall and ripped in half so violently that a belt needed to be wrapped around his waist to stop his entrails from pouring out. He tells us that this is what Catnap does to heretics, hanging them up inside these cells to be fed to the small creatures we saw earlier, day by day. A slow, excruciating death given as punishment for betraying his god. Dog Day tells us to leave, wanting nothing more than for us to bring an end to this madness, but before we even have the chance to, this happens.
Oh no. Mother, no! Leave me! Please! Just go! Run!
Just like that, one of the few friendly faces seen in this chapter is brutally eaten alive from the inside, using his final moments of consciousness to beg us to leave before he becomes a puppet that tries to kill us. But his words are spoken in vain, because not long after, his voice is lost to the sound of him choking on the creatures now inhabiting his body, and we're forced to run for our lives. He pursues us through the playhouse, the loud thumping and the sound of his violent choking getting louder and louder as he closes in, until eventually we're able to escape through a lift that ends the section. That was the moment that won me over as a Poppy Playtime fan. And now that you've seen it, let's take a look at why. This moment stands out to me for two very big reasons. The first, and easily the more important reason of the two, is the fact that Mob Entertainment even had the guts to do it. Allow me to explain. As much as I adore the mascot horror genre and many of the different titles we've gotten out of it, there's been a pressing issue I've had with it that's only gotten worse in recent memory. See, because mascot horror plays off of the idea of taking children's characters and twisting them into something horrifying, naturally the genre has a younger demographic of fans. This in and of itself is not an issue. Children will naturally gravitate to these things, and that's okay. Let kids enjoy what kids enjoy. The issue for me stems from the fact that in an attempt to appeal to this demographic over the years, mascot horror games have become significantly more sanitized and censored over time. Old franchises which used to handle dark subject matters have slowly steered away from that in an attempt to not scare away this audience, and new titles have fallen even further into it by making their games as kid-friendly as possible. This bothers me a lot because not only does it detract from the very reason these games were appealing in the first place, but it also makes it so that the subgenre itself can't really live up to its full potential. This was especially bad for me with early chapters of Poppy. It felt like this game had all the fundamentals of a great horror experience, but Mob didn't want to fully realize them to better advertise to its target demographic of children, leaving the game in this strange state where it wasn't necessarily a kid's game, but it also wasn't really a horror game. This moment matters to me so much because it finally showed me that Mob Games wants their game to be scary. It presents us with a moment that I never thought I would see from this game, a moment that is legitimately brutal and deals with morbid subject matters I haven't seen any other mascot horror title even try to tackle. Seeing this was such a breath of fresh air after everything that's come out recently. I feel like with this approach being taken and the massive success that Poppy Chapter 3 has had, it'll encourage more developers to have a greater focus on horror again in their indie titles without needing to be afraid of losing that young demographic they've built up. Cause okay, let's be real here, children love horror regardless, and on top of that, a scarier horror title will also attract a new audience of older fans that will have a newfound respect for the mascot horror subgenre. This much has already been seen with Poppy Chapter 3, with so many notable creators who never cared about the game before now giving it a try and genuinely enjoying it. If more games follow suit, I feel like it'll be extremely healthy for the subgenre and bring about some much needed change. The second reason this moment stands out so much to me has to do with both the build up to it as well as the execution. As well as all the build-up I mentioned at the start, there is so much foreshadowing present in Chapter 3 that warns us of this moment before we even get to it. Take, for example, every piece of imagery relating to Dog Day. These little drawings and cutouts of the smiling critters appear all over the place in Chapter 3, with Dog Day being one of the most prevalent characters. And there is one thing about all these artistic depictions of him that they have in common. That being the pose that Mob Games decided to put him in. At first glance, you would have no reason to see anything wrong with this. However, after completing the Playhouse section, you quickly learn what these images are really trying to show you. Stuff like this makes this moment feel so much more impactful than it would have on its own, because it feels like it was properly set up by all the events leading to it through the chapter. You don't just randomly stumble across this gruesome display of Dog Day's fate. Instead, you're left to ponder what could possibly lie beyond the entrance to the Playhouse, only to be met with something that far exceeds the expectations that the game set. A fantastic moment of horror which is properly built up to, has phenomenal execution, and sets a precedent for mascot horror that, in my opinion, is very needed right now. And this is just a small moment in a massive overall chapter which shares this tone the entire way through. My hope with this video was to use this moment as an example of why, if you haven't already, you should give Poppy Playtime Chapter 3 a try. I know this game still has a bit of a reputation as being horror for kids, and it rightfully earned that title over the years, but if you go into it with an open mind, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. I only had a passing interest in this series before, but now with the quality of Chapter 3, I can say with full chest that this is one of my favorite indie titles that is out right now. So if it was able to win me over, maybe it could do the same for you. Anyways though, that'll be all from me for now. I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed making it, and I can't wait to see you here again for whatever my next project ends up being. Goodbye for now.